I'm Kevin Farrel, Endre Roda.
Since 1956. How long's that?
I've not... about 50 years, isn't it? We've known each other 50 years. On and off. Because we was...
No, we never lost touch, actually, oddly enough.
Yeah, I tried to get away from Andy. But I moved down south and to the Dorset coast. And then Andy, about 10 years... when did you come round? You've been there about 14 years.
Eventually full-time, 13 years ago.
Yeah. So we live within about 100 yards of each other. Well, when I was at school, I think we're discussing school. And when I was in Sheffield, I went to secondary school, Marlcliffe. And school was a complete mystery to me. I couldn't understand algebra, mathematics, or anything. And the only thing I could produce that was sort of logical was art. So I think it started then for me.
Same for me.
Yeah.
Well, in my case, I had a half-brother who was a commercial artist in Budapest, and he was sort of quite often spoken about in the family, so I took an interest then. At the age of 13, I became an art student, part-time evening student in Malta, in College of Art. Then I came to England when I was 15, when I again, well, apart from art in school, I again enrolled in an evening class in art. So I had this interest from relatively early on. At the age of 18, I joined the army. Then when I came out, I did one or two other things, but then I became a student of architecture. Didn't like that. And then luckily I managed to enroll in Sheffield College of Art in *56. I was probably the oldest student in the place at the time, and probably one of the most very different type of background. Well, everyone else I think was more or less a Sheffield.
Just we're all school kids, weren't we?
Sorry?
We're all school kids,
yes,
really.
Yeah.
Equivalent to a sixth form, it was. You know, you either did if you were very academic, you would go to high stores to do A levels, and if you were practical, if you were big and strong, you went in the works and you get an apprenticeship being an electrician or steel worker. If you were rather fey and not much anything else, you tended to go to do other things, and I ended up going to the art college.
Basically, the feeling slightly was if you were a bit of a duffer, you did art.
Yeah, if you could produce, if you made things, didn't you? Yeah. Well, with me it was just what was available, because I don't think you're very lucky because you can shoot around, can't you? And you've got like a different vision. But we were I think England in the 50s and 60s was very restricted.
Local schools of art.
Yeah, and so you had to. And there was no money, so you lived with stayed at home, basically.
You only had Sheffield School of Art, Wakefield School of Art, Rotherham School of Art, and so it went on. Every place had its own School of Art in that way. So they had an element of their own ethos.
Yeah. You were allowed to, you were given, it was free, you had your fees paid, and all you had to do was survive, so your parents... I got 10 and 6 a week, or a month was it? I got something like 10 bob, we called it, and it was enough to, you couldn't do anything really, and so you stayed at home and they fed you, and my brother and sister, they went, my brother was in the works, my sister had a job in a business, and I was sort of the, I was allowed to sort of, the indulgence in the family. So I was allowed to stay at home, and I was supported really by my parents. Actually.
Well, in my case, I worked every summer as a builder's labourer, every Christmas on the post. Jobs were very easy to come by, and odd one or two things in that way. So you had this sort of parental help, but you were local, so you lived at home. You didn't have much choice in that anyway. Eventually, in my case, I then finished up by doing an ATD, Art Teacher's Diploma, for which you got a grant. And the grant was good enough to get married, which I did.
Why did you get married?
And I'm still married to the same person.
I drew Carol when she was 16. How old is she now?
Older.
She's in her 70s, and yeah. But you couldn't. You were very limited, didn't you? You had to go to a local school or college because you couldn't afford to travel anywhere, and I think we had a very restricted vision actually, and there was no cash about, was there?
Yeah, I oddly enough, it was restricted, but I think it has certain advantages in that it gave you I don't know what's going on now, but I did teach in a College of Higher Education, Bretton Hall, where students, much like yourselves, were working towards degrees, and so I have some inkling of what went on then, but I've been retired for 30 years, so it's a bit of a strange view I have, if you like, of what's going on now. But it was good in that it gave you a more personal direction. And I think if you see Kevin's work, you might think we didn't go to the same training. And how different it is now, or how similar it is now, I don't know. And the major departure, if you like, from us, we were still Renaissance students. The high Renaissance was our, this is what we were aiming at. Whereas people who succeeded financially, and even in terms like Hockney, Hockney was in Wakefield.
No, Bradford.
Bradford, sorry. They were rather more directed to what was going on in America. So even here, John Hoyland, do you know his work? He was a student in Sheffield just slightly before us. He became an RA, and he became an abstract expressionist, American type work. Very successful in this sort of way. How enduring these things are, I don't know, it's another matter. But with us, we're still, our training or our focus was on very much on the Renaissance and the idealization of, say, Raphael, certainly in my case.
But I think at Sheffield College of Art there were factions, and there are probably factions here now, but there were certain people on the staff, certain teachers, and they had a particular emphasis. And we happened to, you could move away from Taylor. There was a tutor called W.S. Taylor, another one called Eric Jones. And Eric Jones had been trained in Rome. He was at the British School at Rome. And
very fine craftsman.
Yeah, so he was talking all the time. He was talking in Italian a lot of the time. He'd come round and start spouting Italian poetry. And they may have some of his work here, but he would talk about Rome, and he was always pushing classical art, wasn't he, figurative art. But there were other people interested in people like Hoyland and Brian Fielding, a number of others. They went towards. They were looking towards London. They had a different idea on painting and drawing.
From roughly the same time, I think there were three, well, maybe more, but there were three of us who were sort of, well, the students most active, if you like, were me, Kevin, and this girl called Susan Hilton, who was the closest, perhaps, in her style at the time to Taylor. I considered her the most talented of the students. And she worked at this. She'd been in what was called the JAD, which was roughly here.
You could. There was a way in Sheffield at the time. You could, if you didn't pass a scholarship, we all did a scholarship exam, and if you failed, if you weren't bright, you went to one particular school. And if you went,
Susan Hilton was very
if you went to a grammar school, you went to King Edward's. Or if you're a Catholic, you went to De La Salle School. There were certain pathways through, and there was one oddment in Sheffield, and it was called the Junior Art Department. And if you didn't pass this exam, the 11 plus, but if you're very practical, you went to, and I think Dave Mellor went to the Junior Art Department,
Mellor?
and you started at 11.
He was a student slightly before.
Yeah, and you were doing a practical course, and the Junior Art Department, I think we're roughly sitting over it. It was sort of the art school was sort of it had been blitzed in the war, but there was bits of it left, and it was cobbled together, and there was a junior art department, and there were and I think Susan went there.
Yeah.
I think Dave Mellor went there, I think. So there were people, and they were very practical and very brilliant with their hands, weren't they?
Well, they sort of were a step ahead of. In my case, it was a bit different, being older than that. But as the bulk of the students would probably know nothing. That maybe it would, first lesson almost immediately was live drawing. So there were all these 16, 17-year-olds ushered into the presence of a fairly attractive nude woman. It was probably the first
Well,
time.
I remember I've never seen a woman with no clothes on at 17, and suddenly this we went into this class, and there was about 18 of us all crouched over this board, and this Eric Jones was the teacher, and he was very eccentric, gnarled and old, and
He wasn't that old, but he looked
well, he looked old if he was
He looked
17,
old, yeah.
and suddenly we didn't know, we came with these drawing boards, and suddenly this girl dropped this dressing gown and just absolutely stark naked, and he was completely stunned, and then you had to start drawing, and with your trembling hands, and they'd be drawing this figure, and Jones would come round and he'd be he'd start drawing for you, and he would tap you on the shoulder, and he'd stand up respectfully, and then he would correct your drawing. Fantastic.
We're not on the drawing, alongside.
He'd draw like that, and then he'd move on to the next one. And so you did this all day, you came out completely exhausted.
That painting was there. And, he was one of the sort of directions we were pointed into, classical draftsmanship. And so you had to, well, the way I sort of described it was if you were drawing an eyelid, for example, about 1/8 of an inch long, you got the skill to change direction maybe half a dozen times to describe the upward, the along, the dip, and then down. So you could handle these things, which is what we were speaking about. The eye-to-hand skills were very highly considered, but always, I think, within the framework, which appealed to me, less to you, I think, of idealization. So it wasn't what was there, but how nature could be improved upon.
Yeah. But it was very intense, wasn't it? And it was a complete shock to the system. And I didn't tell my mother and father what I'd been doing. But now it's all changed, isn't it? It's all in your face, as they say now. It's like the past is another country. Now he would come round and he'd draw, and he'd say the pelvis.
The best draftsman
He'd say, your weight is on, the weight is of the model's on the right leg, and the left leg, the pelvis drops. And I didn't know what a pelvis was, and he said, and he just drew a pelvis. He drew the bone structure underneath, and then he moved on. And we were all busy, we'd do this line, and then fill in with these, like when we'd been to the secondary school, you sort of, the idea was to fill in, and you weren't allowed to fill in, you had to draw in line. And
the line had to describe the volume.
The line had to do everything, and so he went round, and then you'd have a rest, and then you might do 2 poses in a day, he'd do one for 3 hours, and then come back in the afternoon, and he'd change and he'd do another one, and he'd work his way around again. It went on like that. So that was the first day in the school. But I think you've probably got some of his drawings in there.
There are some, yeah. As I say, the book's not on Eric Jones, but I think he was, one of the finest draftsmen ever. Not just with us, we're very lucky, I think, to have him. And we felt with Taylor, whose philosophy is maybe more than his work even, it was gave the college, he and his wife, she did the sculptures on the sculpture department. Very, very fine work. Again, I think, I think there's a piece in there of hers, who were within this sphere of, do you know how terracotta? Yeah. She produces, well, to do a terracotta statuette, you build from the bottom up. So if you have a standing figure,
it had to be made hollow, didn't it?
Yeah, you finish the feet, then go up to the, wherever the knees, and so the thing grows in that way. It's very, very difficult, and she produced beautiful. We both have some examples of her work.
She was she was working roughly where we are now.
Yeah.
And we, you know, the course, what we did the drawing, and then they said, right, everybody, you go down to the city, you get the bus down to Sheffield, to the centre, go to the art department, meet down there, and then you had to you had to be modelled in clay. You made a model in clay, and some of us pieces were around, and then you had to, so you made these models, you had to produce a figure. So you had to, you know, make some drawings and then produce this figure with an armature, build the clay onto it. She would come around and correct it and work it. And you had to you had to put a mould on it. Then you had to break the mould, you had to fill the mould and then chip it out. So it was all, this went on, you know, a day a week you came down. And you had to produce certain things, you know. So you learnt all the techniques of making this sculpture. It had to be, what was it, about 18 inches high or something?
So, yeah, well, varied.
But that was Taylor's wife, and she was a terrific sculptor, wasn't she?
I think, yeah. I think it, well, I've said this to give, in reflection, she was probably the best artist, actually, in the college.
Well, I don't know anything.
Well, that's the feeling I have. I would, if I was to pick just the one.
Well, I think Taylor was.
They were husband and wife instead.
Yeah, but Taylor, and funny enough, we knew him. You kept in contact with him, but I disappeared off the scene.
Well, I did some teaching in the college.
But Taylor eventually he owned a house in Hathersage, and then he had a place in Cornwall. We used to go and visit him, and he ended up, you know, living by himself. But I thought Taylor was Eric Jones drew. He'd go around drawing, and it was very strong. And you must work in complete silence. And if anybody said anything, you were thrown out. He used to come and berate you in Italian, and you were thrown out. You must work diligently. The whole group. It was very intense. You got this immense, terrific atmosphere, you know, and it was really good. But I thought Taylor would come round, he would correct your work, and he used to use chalks and all sorts of things, and he would tap colour and things onto the drawing, and he was more of a very painterly approach. Yeah. And I always remember Jones, certain things he told me, and I remember like Taylor, we were painting, we were drawing a girl and she had a black top on. And it was this pale girl, black top, and then there was this background. And I painted this black top, and then I put the background in. And he said, no. He says the black has got this white, it's got a light on it. So he put a highlight on the black, which was quite high in tone. And then he did the background slightly down, and he related parts of the model and the background and something else. So he sort of saw above the figure. You know, it wasn't just drawing the woman and then the background. He sort of saw a block of space, and he did like the lights and then the middles and the backs, and it didn't matter if it was a woman there, a chair, and it was really, really interesting. I thought it was very interesting, Taylor. So you know, that approach. I remember that approach. Yeah. But we saw him a couple of months before he died, didn't we?
He died 3 years ago.
Yeah, and it was complete. He's surrounded by. He had things that he rescued from the College of Art when it was blitzed. He got he came down and carried bits and pieces because they're all being smashed up and taken away on the tip to a skip.
It wasn't so much the blitz. Oddly enough, again, the change in attitude. When I was in college in art school in Malta, we drew from the plaster cast. Didn't do that in England, but partly because the college which was here, they decided they would discard all that by actually destroying it. And so, I don't know if it was skip in those days, but that sort of thing. They were throwing all stuff like that into the skip. And he rescued a lot of it.
Oh, he told me it was all after the Blitz, all
well, it may have been sort of after the Blitz, but I think the college decided they were going to get rid of old-fashioned ideas. But when we were there was still an element. You had a skeleton, a skull, the geometrical objects, the old-fashioned teaching. They were all still there. and some plaster casts, which I think Taylor saved. So they were there. So I had this awareness of a recent past.
There was a, you had to draw, there was a skeleton, didn't they? They had a flayed man.
Yeah.
They had a flayed figure with all the muscles on, which you could refer to. And they also had a skeleton,
Yeah.
which they put in Jones arranged, didn't he? You had to draw the skeleton. So you draw the bone structure. So you produce drawings like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you were drawing, and there were one or two busts, but you used them, didn't you, sometimes?
Yeah, yes, yeah, yeah. And you know, there was lots of talk about the sternum, the clavicle, the iliac crest, you know, and so on. So, oh well, that can't be right. You know, the weight is on that leg, so the iliac crest will tilt up. You know, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
You know,
and Jones had a strong interest in figure drawing, and there were certain drawings which the prized students, weren't they, prized drawings.
Yeah.
John Corbridge, who eventually went to Greece, and I think he had his drawings out.
Yeah.
And Rosie Lee, was it Rosie Peters?
Yeah, Rosie
He had
Peters
her
was
drawings,
represented.
yeah. I
mean,
don't think they might be there.
Former students, quite well known as John Hoyland, Derek Greaves, Jack Smith, went through this. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Derek Greaves, I know. Derek Greaves, some of his artwork. Sorry,
There's one up there.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, he was a bit before us.
There was a strong social realist movement in the 50s. There was a big competition started in Liverpool called the John Moores Prize, and the first winner was from Sheffield, was a Sheffield student, Jack Smith, and he painted women in sinks and tables with cutlery on and Vim packets and breakfast cereals, didn't
It was called also at one time the kitchen sink school.
And Jack Smith was the first one. I think Terry Lee was
very represented in the
yes, there's a painting of his up there, yeah. But he was a social realist, and it was a big thing. And there's a character called John Bratby, and they produced a film called From the Horse's Mouth.
Gully Jimson.
And and there's all John Bratby's paintings in there. It's a very, very interesting film. You ought to get it out if you can. The Horse's Mouth, paintings by John Bratby, and it's all the kitchen sink school in the 50s, and that only lasted. It disappeared suddenly, didn't it? All went.
Social realism.
Yeah, social realism. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't put it that way, particularly. I mean, the bit that was most fruitful was ultimately when I did paint. I did he specialized. I didn't specialize. You did printmaking and painting, didn't you? Yeah. I specialized in painting specialist, it was called, and so all I did was paint. And as I said, there's one of the paintings I did in that year. Is there self-portrait, that sort of thing, and that was. You know what I was going for. In fact, I remember when I was doing that, I thought, I wish I could stay here forever. Because all you did was just do your own thing, paint your own paintings in any direction you wanted to go. The teaching method, which was mainly for painting, was this fellow Taylor, was presenting whatever you're doing. And if he didn't comment on it, you knew he didn't like it. There was no negative comment much, or if any at all. It was always, oh, that's, something like that's good, and go on to the next one. That's also quite good. But anything that he didn't talk, he doesn't like that.
Well, I was interested in printing, so I did lithography. We all did bits of, when we first went, we were shown you could do at the college.
We did a bit of everything,
etching,
lithography,
there was ceramics,
pottery.
There's everything, wasn't there?
You did a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and you could, and so you went into like, you would go into the 3D workshop and there'd be people raising silver bowls or working in the jewellery section. So we know a couple of students that worked in there. I got interested in printing because I liked, using chemicals and messing about with these sort of old art magical kind of processes. So I was interested in lithography, and there was a tutor called Edward Vevers, and
died recently.
he had this workshop, and there was a couple of printing presses, lithography presses, and there were about 8 of us were interested. So there was a queue, and it was very competitive, and you were allowed a certain amount of time on these printing presses. And with lithography, I mean, I did bits of etching, but that didn't appeal to me. And lithography is where it's fairly complex, where you work on a flat surface.
Well, they might know.
And you're drawing with inks which are greasy, and you've got to keep the whole surface wet. It's a very complicated process, and I found the sort of complications quite interesting. So that sort of approach of working in a workshop I really enjoyed, and I got a lot out of that. And eventually I went to Royal College, and I worked in the graphics department there doing printing, and you met lots of marvelous, really interesting people there. So I don't know if you've got graphics here, but I dodged around a bit. You know, I found the painting. I don't think I was as good. I wasn't as focused on it like Endre. I quite liked shunting, mucking around and doing things, processes. And books, I liked, the smell of paper and riffling through books and comics. I thought really interesting. I mean, probably.
Well, it was just touched upon.
Which
was to focus mainly on skills, hand and eye skills, and providing you were within that framework, by and large, you could do anything you wanted. I tended, well, if you look at I tended to be on fanciful things mainly, although I did quite a lot of portraiture. And so you had to show that you could do whatever it was you were doing. And of late, there seems to be a tendency with skills. Tracy Ehrman, for example, seem to not count for anything. So there she's professor of drawing. Have you seen any of her drawings? So it's, you think, well, what's happened?
But I think they're very suspicious of skills, aren't they, nowadays? So yeah, it's a shame, really. I suppose with the trouble is the sort of media. There's all this thing called the media, whatever. It's where everything's slightly distant, isn't it? You can. I think we were at a fairly not primitive stage, but you had to actually get your hands very messy, mixing up ink. We mixed up inks, so you actually got gloops of oil, and if you were doing etching, you had to grind up colours. So you had to learn how to do that. We mixed up mediums for painting. We found all sorts of techniques for, you got linseed oil, you boiled it with litharge, and then you mixed a resin, you got dry resin, salt it in gum spirits of turpentine, you put them together. And we were mixing mediums that Rubens was supposed to have made up. And you got Rembrandt's, these formulas with wax and oil, didn't you, to mix with paint?
Jacques Maroche was the person who produced this book. It's still obtainable. It's very expensive now. It's no reprints. And I sort of, I think you did.
But we all explored. But you produced pigments, and we actually produced, believe it or not, something called raw totley. Like raw sienna. Raw sienna, it's a colour, isn't it, called raw sienna, and burnt sienna. So you get the pigment from the you get an iron oxide in Italy, and you can burn it, and you produce a darker red. Raw sienna is like a yellow ochre, and then you burn it, and it produces a darkish red. Well, we found this iron stream in Totley, just outside Sheffield. We got pigment, which is stained with iron, and we filtered it, shipped all the leaves and bits off, and dried it, and split it and ground it up, dried it, split it in half, burnt it, so it went dark red. And we had we had raw totley, which was like a yellow ochre, and then we had a burnt totley, which was like a darkish red. Now we ground it in. You can ground it in oil.
Messing about, basically.
No. And then we ground it in linseed oil, and that's your oil paint. So you had an earth colour, you could make it, or you could nip down to the shop and buy a tube. It saved a lot of messing. But you sort of explored things. You mixed up your own printing inks, all that sort of, and mix your own gums for for making lithographic plates and mix-up acids for etching and so
Within
on.
the college, you could freewheel as much as like I became a sort of, I don't know how much you shared in this, a sort of college expert in media. So,
Oil painting media.
oil painting
They
media.
mean now media
Oh,
now
so-
means,
sorry, oil
means
painting
TV
media.
and all sorts of rubbish,
So,
doesn't it?
well, the tutors occasionally came to me to say, what would you have to do, you know, Terry Leakin, to do fast drying, sort of oil paint thing, and you did this, black oil of the Venetians, which was oil, which was cooked with litharge, which is now banned throughout the world.
A lot of the stuff we did would be
Yeah,
banned, wouldn't it?
on hell grounds, and you mix this with either for fine detail with mastic varnish, or for lumpier type effects, such as Rembrandt. And I although I haven't had it proved, I think Van Gogh used this medium. So his thick applications are with wax mixed with the paint. So the paint lies down in a particular way.
It doesn't flood, does it? Just
Yeah.
stays, yeah. Oh no, it's fantastic. It's brilliant.
No, I said I
It was
wanted to
just-
be there forever.
It was just, yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. Yeah, and
But
they
in a
took it-
studio, your own studio, you could
Yeah.
do whatever you wanted.
And they actually, when you were at school, you were sort of driven. I went to a Catholic school at one bit, and you were driven by nuns who thrashed and beat you, and you talked about sin, and and they said you're born with sin, and they talked about the Immaculate Conception, which I thought was an Italian football team actually, but it wasn't. It was some anyway. But you know, and then we suddenly came to this place, and they thought your ideas were interesting. So Vivas or Jones or Taylor would say, what are you doing? And you'd say, well, I'm doing this drawing of portrait of Dostoevsky or something. And they say, oh, that's interesting. And they talked to you as though you were people, weren't they? Instead of sort of, they were very, gave you time and
Yeah.
interest. Absolutely amazing, which I'd never ever come across, even from my dad, from my father.
It's probably much the same now, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're respected as with your opinions are respected, no doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to London, and I won a scholarship to Royal College of Art, so I went there, and then I went into the graphics printing section, and I met these incredible people like Ron Kittai, Hockney, Peter Phillips, people in film, really like you filmmakers. It was absolutely amazing. Celia Birtwistle, they were all fashion designers and people like that. It was amazing. And then I went on to Berlin.
Yeah. Well, in my case, I did a teacher training course. I was 6 years older than the average.
And you got married, didn't you?
And got married while still on the course. Then became a school teacher, teaching in, well, all sorts of things. Eventually got a job as the art curator, I suppose, in the Sheffield City Art Galleries, which were 2 sites, more than 2 sites actually at the time. It was quite a very nice job. Went into education as a lecturer in Bretton Hall College, which has recently closed down.
Yeah, I came back, and Vivas was.
Well, you taught.
I did a short time.
He was a lecturer there for a while.
I did a short bit because they were trying. Sheffield was. It did mainly fine art and sculpture, and they lost some of the courses, but they were trying to expand into graphic design, and Vivas was trying to build up the graphic design, and he wanted somebody to do printing. So I shot in. I'd come back from Berlin. I took a motorbike to Berlin, and the German government gave me some money to work in Berlin when the Berlin Wall was up. So it was very interesting. I went there, and I came back skint. Had a good time in Germany, and I sold this motorbike, which kept me going for a bit. And then and then Ted said, "Do some printing." And I met he was one of the students, Dick French. Really interesting, completely batty. Well, he might be watching this. Very interesting student, and and I sort of helped. It was really interesting. So and then I got fed up with that, and I left because I thought it was too limiting. and I was trying to do. I was doing like working in. I was trying to produce textiles, printing.
Well, the college
t-shirts.
was changing around you.
It was changing a lot. And,
you know, these old values, as we saw them, were being eroded, and around that time, very rapidly.
yeah.
In the 70s, you know, hard edge was. Do you know? You didn't know what hard edge was. Do you know what hard edge is?
Hard edge
This
painting.
very painting where you use masking tape, more or less geometrical things. The Americans did it. What's the famous American? I think probably Jasper John did some.
Frank Stella.
Anyway, but they using masking tape, and so it was a geometrical, very, very clear-cut images. And some colleges, I don't think Sheffield quite did that, didn't allow anything else to go on other than that.
That was in the fine art department.
In the fine art, obviously. So you know the things. And I think that probably you felt that the college was no longer.
Yeah, it was changing a lot.
appropriate
Yeah. And there was a Sheffield. I always got interested in printing, screen printing more. Lithography. The problem is you need these workshops, really controlled workshops, and it was expensive to set up. And when screen printing was coming in, it was developing rapidly, and so I tried to separate. I was printing things like shopping bags, T-shirts. I was doing textiles, and I got interested in applying tickets, posters, and that sort of thing. There's a group called Designing Sheffield at the time, and they organised a chap called Brian Edwards. He was connected to the architects in Hyde Park, and I did odd jobs like things like I did a concrete mural for Hyde Park Flats. They had the Lord Mayor's show, and I did a float for that. So I was more interested in getting out and doing applied things, and that was very interesting. And Mellor was working. Mellor and Asquith were developing.
You know Asquith, Brian Asquith?
Brian Asquith
He did
designed
the
all
street
the
furnishing in the what used to be called the Peace Gardens by the town hall.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's it,
But Brian Asquith, right? They set up they had a workshop just round the corner from here. I don't know if it's probably demolished, but they were working in a room not much bigger than this, and Dave Mellor was doing industrial design with Brian Asquith. We were invited to the workshops. You remember going and seeing them? And it was very, very limited, primitive things, but they were producing really interesting stuff. So there was things going on there.
I never quite lost contact with the college. You know, you asked about it. I did some part-time teaching, and because I developed a close friendship with Taylor, who became dean of the college, an enduring friendship anyway. So I never lost touch. I was until about 13 years ago, when I left Sheffield, I sort of knew more or less anything. Well, I knew a lot about what's going on in the college.
Yeah, there's all sorts of names on there that just before us, and you know, odd things there, people that I knew. I don't know. You never see them around, do you? The people, they've all flitted all over the place. Well, Susan Hilton, Susan was, she ended up marrying to the Lasky family, I think, didn't she? Lived in Hampstead.
You won't know who they are. Margarita Lasky was an author, and they came from a family with different surname of well-known sort of economic theorists.
Lived in Hampstead. Derek Simpson went to America, didn't he? Silversmith, goldsmith. But
they dispersed all over.
So and all this is a permanent display.
Yeah, pretty much.
As I say, that wing was there from day one for us, and it was set up, you know, because it's Raphaelesque, and Raphael, I think, for me, was acceptably presented as the ideal. You know, he thought, you know, that he was the what did he say? Well, we used to use Italian quote, certa idea. What do you work to? Well, he said, Raphael said, well, I've got a certain idea, which I think meant idealism.
The only bit of the course that wasn't much good was the art history, wasn't it? The only it was all practically based, and I think like The library.
You had to do your own art history.
When we went to the college at Salter Lane, the library was roughly twice as big as this, but it was kept locked in case the books were used.
And you were allowed in under special...
Under separate, with a key, under supervision. And it was very difficult to get any of the books out. And occasionally, Edward Vivers he got a magazine sent from Switzerland called Graphis, which is absolutely incredible, and it had like coloured photos in it, colour because we lived in a black and white world, didn't we?
Yeah,
really.
Well,
I don't think you realise what a sort of glitzy life you'll lead.
Well, there were Skira books.
But there's only two Skira books, so occasionally brought out.
But they had colour, that's what I mean. Yeah. And quite often, with these things, it was great Flemish artists like Hugo van der Goes, which you couldn't quite emulate. They weren't within the spirit of what you wanted to. But they did set you very high standards. Even now, whenever I go to the National Gallery in London, I make a point of looking at the Mabuse. I don't know if do you know it? What's his other name? Mabuse is
Gossert, is it?
Yeah, Gossert. It's got two names for some reason. And beautifully painted. Every little pearl, every stitch is rendered. Do you know it by any chance? Anyway, this was, incredibly high standard. You couldn't do it. And even now, when you see this work of the early Flemings, like him and Van Eyck, of course, you can see things that you can't do. Like the candelabra. And the chandelier, sorry, in the Van Eyck, Arnolfini family. You can't work out how you would set about doing it. And I think that was, they were the things that were, you dangled in front of yourself.
Well, Taylor used this W.S. Taylor would take us to Chatsworth, because part of we drew the figure, and then you were taken out where you drew, the landscape, and we took us to the station, the market, so you do bits of perspective there to learn it. But Taylor took us to Chatsworth on a trip, and he knew the librarian, and so we went into Chatsworth House, and this librarian said, "What do you want to see?" And he'd say, "What do you want?" And I said, "Have you got any Rubens?" And he'd say, "Yes." And he'd go up a lad and he'd pass a Rubens drawing to you, like that. He'd say, "All right." And he said, "What about a Rembrandt wash drawing?" He'd say, "Yeah." And you get a drawing like that, and he'd say, "Oh, right, yeah, you can see how he's done that." And these things are accessible, wasn't it? And he's actually handling drawings.
Very different to the attitudes now, I think.
Well, if you I went to Chatsworth about 2 years ago on a visit, stumbling around with hundreds of other people. And I said to one of the curators, one of the attendants, I said, "Oh, the drawings used to be kept in." He says, "Oh," he said, "you can't see them, lad." He said, "They're in a strong room now, you never see them. We get 5 out a year under special conditions in this room." And I thought, good God, we were passing them around, and so I think we were very lucky. We must have.
That's right, yeah. Luckily for me, again, I don't know how it infringes on your attitudes, but I mean, it must have had the effect. Malta is a Baroque country. Have any of you been? All the churches are Baroque, much like say in Rome, except obviously not quite up to the standard. And the nearest thing for me in Sheffield was Chatsworth, Italianate. And so for me, a lot of my work, even now, is based on a Chatsworthian idea, which I actually renamed in my work, YS, a mythical country that never quite existed anywhere, but it's somewhere around France. And so but Chatsworth was the touchstone for me. Yes. The grounds and the stuff in it. Yeah. Although it wasn't fully open to the public, was it? But we got access.
There were, it wasn't developed. Now it's like a tourist resort, isn't it? They have a special Chatsworth Christmas. But we went, it was all gloomy and closed up. You could shuffle around past fantastic paintings, and just get access to the library. It was amazing.
So it was Chatsworth, Hardwick Hall, Haddon Hall.
Didn't you had a BSA Bantam? You took Eric Jones, who was a very old, stooped Italianate scholar artist, and he took him on the back of his BSA Bantam in the rain to, was it Haddon Hall or
Hardwick.
Hardwick Hall? Yeah.
Have you
and
been?
he broke
Hardwick?
down.
Yeah, it's a famous more glass than wall building. You must go. It's quite near. We seem to live in again for a student in a slightly different world. As I say, for me, the high point in this other world was, with easy access, was Chatsworth, where you could actually go up to the hunting tower. You could roam around anywhere.
Yeah, you could just wander around, couldn't you?
And then Hardwick Hall, which was different but had a magic about it. Elizabethan, you know, the first building in Elizabethan times was moving towards classicism.
And I remember.
So it was that sort of world we lived in, and I think I would guess very different to yours, is it?
Yeah.
It was a lot. It was a lot rougher, wasn't it? Now? And I remember going to the staff. They were very good. The staff. They also the lecturers. They bought your work. They bought paintings and prints, and they gave you odd prizes. And we won 10. Did we win something like £5 each to go on a tour of England? And we got a bus. We went to somewhere like, we stayed in a youth hostel in Holland Park, and then I went on to Oxford, and I went to the Ashmolean and I said, I'm writing something on Samuel Palmer, who was this fantastic friend of William Blake, and they said, all right, come in. And
Samuel Palmer?
Samuel Palmer is a marvellous friend of Blake and Calvert, and they were lived near in Shoreham in Kent. Anyway, did these wonderful drawings and very odd things, and they have a collection of them in the Ashmolean. And I went in, and they said, oh yeah, sit down. They brought these things out, and they said, would you like to see some of his notebooks? And I said, oh, go on then. And so the curator sort of came in, and he said, that's one of his sketchbooks. And I was, oh, thank you very much. And I was sort of going through his drawings. And, and that's another book on his, he'd done a colour.
Yeah.
He'd done a colour circle. I didn't realise that. And he'd done this circle with the primaries and secondaries on it. It made like a solid ball. And I was looking through that. And they had a big exhibition in the British Museum about 3 or 4 years ago of Palmer. And the stuff that had been handling was in a glass case. And I suddenly saw this thing which I'd seen. I'd been riffling through in Oxford when I was a student, and they were all they're all now being curated in this exhibition.
Well, we also listened to a lot of classical music and read quite a lot of poetry. And I think the guru, certainly for me at the time, the arch guru, was Aldous Huxley. Are you aware of meaningful to you? Well, he was on the news recently because he died at the same time as Kennedy. So when he died, there was absolutely no announcement of his death because Kennedy's assassination filled everything up. And he had this philosophy that was very acceptable, I think, to the general run of students, young as the others were. And we listened to classical music almost all the time in the studio. I tended to.
I didn't know.
Yeah, well, you were there. you had to listen to it whether you wanted to or not. But I remember Dex Simpson came along with the fire, the three-cornered hat, and went on about it. So it was that type of feel and awareness of the arts in general. The poet, I think, who was most often talked about was T.S. Eliot.
Oh, well, that was they used to have a thing called the Third Programme in England years ago. They used to have the BBC one, the light programme, which was rubbish, like the Archers and stuff like that. They had the Third Programme, and it was all intellectual art criticism, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And like the first Reith lecture was it Eric Newton on art and design, and it was very scholarly.
Yeah.
And I listened the other day. I turned on the Reith lecture by Grayson Perry, who this bloke dresses as a woman, a mad potter. And I thought, good God, the past is another country, and I think I prefer to live there. And it was this a man that dresses in a frock doing the Reith lecture. Is absolute garbage. Yeah. And I remember listening to the Third Programme. It was dead serious. Life was serious, wasn't it? And
there was elements of jokey things like Munnings, president of the Royal Academy, gave a speech on one occasion, which was at this jokey level, and he said, "Oh, Picasso painted umpteen square feet of rubbish." you know. Anyway, so a reporter rushed up to Picasso and said, Sir Alfred Munnings says you painted a large acreage of rubbish. And he said, who is Sir Alfred Munnings? So, and that summed it up, I think. The Academy at the time had an even worse reputation than it's got now.